The morning sun rose over the small frontier town, lighting the dusty street and the wooden signs that swung in the breeze. It was a quiet town, where everyone minded their own business and whispered about things they never had the courage to say aloud. That morning, something happened that made every man and woman stop in their tracks. Down the street, a frightened girl stood barefoot, her dress torn, and her face pale from fear. Her hands were rough, her eyes wide. She was one of the slave. Girls brought from the south sold and traded like property. People stood on porches, watching but saying nothing. Fear had taught them to stay quiet. At the edge of the crowd, a woman stood still. Her black dress and simple bonnet marked her as a widow. Her husband had died 3 winters ago, leaving her a small farm and a quiet reputation. Her name was Clara, and though life had taken much from her, it had not taken her courage. She looked at the trembling girl and felt something deep stir inside her, something she thought had died with her husband. She stepped forward slowly, her boots pressing into the dirt, the sound echoing through the silent street. Everyone watched. No one moved. The man who owned the girl stood nearby, arms crossed, daring anyone to speak. The girl had fallen to her knees, trembling as if expecting a blow that never came. Clara's heart ached. She had seen many wrongs in her life, but this felt different. Maybe it was the girl's youth, or maybe it was the fear that looked too familiar. Clara had known fear once too. She walked right up to the girl and knelt beside her. The crowd gasped. The man in charge shouted, "Stay back, widow! This ain't your concern." But Clara didn't listen. Her voice was calm and soft. "What's your name, child?" she asked. The girl looked up, tears streaking her dusty face. She whispered something too low to hear. Clara leaned closer. "Say it again," she said kindly. "I can't help you if I don't know your name." The girl hesitated, glancing around as if speaking her name might cause trouble. Finally, in a shaky voice, she said, "My name's Lila." Clara smiled gently. "Lila, that's a beautiful name." The words were simple, but to the girl they sounded like something sacred. No one had spoken her name with kindness in years. The man growled and stepped forward, his boots slamming against the boards of the sidewalk. "Widow, this girl is property. You best move along before you make trouble for yourself." His words made the crowd tense. People looked down, pretending not to hear. Clara stood up slowly, her calm never breaking. "No person is property," she said quietly. "Not while I have breath in me." The man's face reddened, but something in her eyes made him hesitate. Clara turned back to the girl. "Come with me, Lila." She reached out her hand. The girl looked at it, confused and afraid. No one had ever offered her a hand before. For a moment she didn't move. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached up and took it. Gasps went through the crowd again. No one dared stop her. Clara helped Lila to her feet and started walking down the street, toward her wagon. The silence was heavy. Only the sound of boots in dust and the creak of wooden steps behind them. Some people turned away. Others watched with wide eyes. When they reached the end of the street, a voice called out behind them. A tall man had stepped out from beside the general store. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a leather coat, and dust from the trail. His face was weathered, but his eyes were kind and steady. He was known around town, the rancher who lived near the river, a quiet man named Eli. He had seen what happened from a distance and now stood in their path. Clara stopped. The girl clung to her sleeve, thinking he meant harm. But Eli just looked at Clara, then at the girl. His deep voice carried clearly. "Ma'am," he said, "you know what you're doing?" Clara nodded slowly. "I do." Eli stepped closer. "That man'll come after you. He won't take this kindly." Clara met his gaze. "Then he can come. I'm not turning back." Her tone was gentle but firm. There was no fear in it. Eli studied her for a moment, then nodded. He tipped his hat slightly, as if out of respect. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. Clara looked down at the girl and smiled. "Her name is Lila." Eli's expression softened. He looked at the girl and said, "You're safe with her, you hear?" Lila nodded weakly, unsure how to respond to kindness. Eli glanced at Clara again. "You'll need help," he said. "That man won't let this go." Clara's lips curved faintly. "Then I suppose I'll be counting on the kindness of neighbors." Eli gave a short nod. "Then you can count on me." The moment passed, but something strong began that day. A bond of courage between a widow, a frightened girl, and a rancher who couldn't stand by any longer. Clara led Lila to her wagon, helped her up, and covered her with a blanket. The girl was trembling from cold and fear, but Clara's presence was steady, like a light in a dark room. As the wagon rolled away, people whispered, some calling her foolish, others calling her brave. But Clara didn't hear them. Her mind was already made up. She would not let that girl face cruelty again, no matter the cost. On the way home, Clara spoke softly to Lila, asking small questions about where she came from, if she was hungry, if she liked the sound of the river. Lila answered little, still unsure how to trust. But by the time they reached the farmhouse, a small white house surrounded by brown grass and a quiet barn, something inside her began to feel different. Clara helped her down and led her to the porch. "You'll stay here now," she said simply. "You're not anyone's property anymore." Lila looked up, uncertain. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't have to do this." Clara smiled sadly. "Maybe I don't, but I know what it means to be alone." That night, as Clara lit the lantern inside the kitchen, Lila stood by the window watching the stars. She had never slept under a roof without fear before. She watched Clara move about the small home, pouring warm water into a basin, setting out bread and stew, placing a quilt on a cot by the fire. Everything smelled of safety, something she had almost forgotten. Outside, the wind rustled through the fields. Somewhere in the distance, Eli's horse trotted along the ridge. He hadn't gone far. He wanted to make sure they were safe. In town, the man who claimed to own Lila was already shouting, gathering men to get her back. But Eli had seen the fire in Clara's eyes. She would not be frightened easily. As Lila lay under the quilt, eyes heavy but heart full of thoughts, she whispered, "Thank you." Clara, sitting by the fire, heard her and smiled softly. "You're welcome, child," she said. "Sleep easy now." For the first time in years, the girl fell asleep without chains, without shouting, without fear. And outside, under the wide, dark sky, the rancher sat on his horse by the fence, watching the faint light glowing from Clara's window. He didn't know why he felt drawn to stay, but something told him this was just the beginning. The wind carried the scent of rain, and the stars shone over the quiet farm. Inside, two souls, one broken, one brave, had found each other. And, though the world outside might come knocking, neither of them would face it alone again. The morning light spilled across the quiet fields, painting the rancher's land and the widow's small home in soft gold. Inside the little farmhouse, the smell of bread filled the air. Lila woke slowly, blinking against the brightness coming through the window. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the warm quilt over her, the wooden walls, the chair where Clara had sat by the fire the night before. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, until she saw the widow smiling from the kitchen table. "You slept through the rooster," Clara said with a small laugh. "That means you were tired." Lila hesitated, her hands clutching the quilt. "I thought maybe it was a dream," she whispered. Clara shook her head. "No, child. This is real. You're safe here." The girl's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. She nodded and looked away, but the warmth in her chest didn't fade. She had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to kindly. Clara slid a bowl of porridge across the table and said, "Eat up. We have chores to do." Outside, the sun was climbing higher. Clara showed Lila how to feed the hens, how to gather eggs, and how to sweep the porch. Lila worked quietly, eager to help. Each small task seemed new and full of meaning. When Clara thanked her, she looked down shyly, unused to gratitude. Farther down the road, Eli, the rancher, was saddling his horse. He had not slept much. His thoughts had been full of the widow's calm courage and the way she had stood in front of that crowd. He admired her spirit. He also knew the man from town, Jeb Collar, would not let the matter rest. Eli had seen that kind of anger before, the kind that burns deep when pride is bruised. He decided to ride out to Clara's place just to make sure she was all right. When he arrived, Clara was hanging laundry on the line, and Lila was scrubbing a bucket beside the well. The girl froze when she saw the rider approaching, but Clara called out, "It's all right, child. That's Mr. Eli." Eli dismounted slowly, tipping his hat. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You're no intrusion," Clara said. "I was wondering when you'd come by." He smiled faintly. "I reckon I couldn't stay away after what I saw yesterday. Folks in town are talking." Clara looked calm, but there was a flicker of worry in her eyes. "Let them talk. Truth doesn't scare me." Eli nodded. "Jeb's been riled up since you walked off with the girl. He's been trying to get the sheriff to act." Clara sighed softly. "The sheriff will do nothing. He fears Jeb's temper." Eli's jaw tightened. "Then I'll do something if he rides this way." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You'd risk yourself for us?" He met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, you already did what none of us dared. The least I can do is stand by you." The wind picked up, fluttering the clothes on the line. Lila watched them quietly, a mixture of fear and wonder in her eyes. She could not understand why these two strangers cared what happened to her, but she felt safer with them than she had anywhere else. Later that afternoon, Eli stayed to help repair the fence along the pasture. Clara brought lemonade out to him, the sunlight catching the pale gold of her hair under the bonnet. They spoke little, but each word seemed to carry meaning. When he glanced toward the house, he saw Lila standing by the window, smiling shyly before turning away. For the first time in years, Eli felt peace in his chest instead of emptiness. By evening, the air had cooled. Clara invited Eli to stay for supper. They ate stew by the fire, and Clara told small stories about her husband and the early days of the farm. Lila listened quietly, her head resting against the edge of the hearth. The flicker of the firelight made the small kitchen feel alive. Just as Clara poured coffee, a sound broke the peace, a wagon wheel crunching over gravel outside. All three of them looked toward the door. Eli rose slowly, his expression turning hard. Clara went to the window. "It's Jeb," she whispered. "And he's not alone." Eli moved quietly to the door, looking out. Three men stood by the fence, their shapes dark against the twilight. Jeb called out, "Widow, you got something of mine in that house." His voice was rough and full of anger. Clara opened the door just enough to step out onto the porch. "You're mistaken," she said firmly. "No one in this house belongs to you," Jeb sneered. "That girl was bought fair and square. You hand her over now or I'll take it as theft." Clara didn't move. "You call it theft," she said softly, "but I call it mercy." Eli stepped out behind her, his voice calm but deep. "You best head home, Jeb. You're on her land now." Jeb spat on the dirt. "You think you can scare me, rancher?" Eli's eyes stayed steady. "No, but I reckon I can stop you from hurting anyone here." The men behind Jeb shifted uneasily. The setting sun threw long shadows across the yard. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jeb muttered something under his breath and turned back to his wagon. "You'll regret this, widow," he said, his voice low. "This ain't over." When they were gone, Clara let out a long breath. Lila stood just inside the door, her small hands trembling. Eli turned toward her gently. "You all right, little one?" She nodded, though tears glistened in her eyes. Clara placed an arm around her shoulders. "You're safe now. Don't be afraid." Eli stayed until the stars appeared, making sure no one returned. Before leaving, he said quietly to Clara, "If anything happens, light a lantern on the porch. I'll see it from my place." She smiled faintly. "You'd really watch that close?" "I reckon I would," he said, touching his hat before riding off into the night. Days passed. Lila began to smile more, her laughter soft and uncertain like a bird learning to sing again. She learned how to milk the cow, how to bake bread, how to plant herbs by the window. Clara treated her like family, not a servant. Sometimes at night, Lila would whisper prayers of thanks she barely remembered from childhood. Eli visited often, always with some excuse, a broken gate, a stray calf, a bucket of apples, but Clara knew the truth. He came because he cared. Each visit brought a little more light into her quiet life. One morning, Lila came running in from the road, breathless. "They're coming," she cried. "I saw Jeb and some men riding this way." Clara's face turned pale, but she didn't panic. She went to the porch, lifted the old lantern, and set it on the post. The morning sun made it gleam faintly, but within the hour Eli appeared, riding fast. He carried calmness with him, like the steady wind before rain. Jeb and his men stopped at the gate again, shouting for Clara to give up the girl. Eli rode forward, his voice even. "The sheriff's coming," he lied smoothly. "You'll be the one in trouble if you don't leave now." The men hesitated, glancing at one another. Jeb's anger faltered. Clara stood beside Eli, her chin lifted high. "You'll not take her," she said. "Not today, not ever." Finally, Jeb cursed and turned his horse around. His men followed, muttering under their breath. When they were gone, Eli dismounted, looking at Clara. "You've got more courage than any man I know," he said softly. She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "Maybe courage is what comes when you've lost everything else." Lila ran to them and hugged Clara tightly. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. Eli looked at the two of them. One woman who had risked everything for what was right, and one girl who had finally found freedom and felt something stir in his heart that had been silent for years. Weeks turned into months. The talk in town faded. People began to treat Clara with quiet respect. Some even said the widow and the rancher made a fine pair. Lila grew stronger, her laughter filling the farmhouse. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Eli came by once more. He stood at the fence watching Clara and Lila hang laundry in the golden light. "You know," he said, smiling gently, "I never did thank you proper for what you did." Clara looked up at him, her eyes warm. "There's no need for thanks. Sometimes the heart just knows what it must do." He nodded slowly. "Still, I'd like to stay around. Make sure you and the girl never have to face the world alone again." Clara's smile deepened, soft and true. "Then you're welcome here, Eli. Always." The wind carried the scent of wildflowers as the three of them stood together by the porch. The widow, the rancher, and the freed girl who had found her name again. In a world that had once been cruel and cold, kindness had built a small, shining home, and for the first time in a long time, they all knew what peace felt like.